Hey everyone, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. I've really been having some fun fishing with that thing.
Oh yeah, baby. It's not big, but oh, he's not that small either.
Today we're going to make a popper lure, but with something just a little different on the inside. Let's take a look at the drawing. Alright, well, this is it. I'm not sure green was the best color for this. It's not showing up very well on the camera, but this is my concept, and the shape, as always, is more in tune with my vision for the function than for the actual form. So it's a little bit funky looking, and I'll explain that as we move on through the whole idea of this design. Now, over the years on this channel, I've made a lot of poppers, ranging from this monster saltwater beast to this tiny little frog popper that I made pretty recently. This is going to be somewhere in the middle. It'll be about 3 inches long, but we'll get the dimensions in a minute. Let's talk about the design element. First of all, it's going to have a slightly bigger, proportionally hollow popping mouth than you usually see. It'll also be a little bulkier back here than typical. And there's a little bit of a turn down in the tail. All that is really to get the most out of that popping action. And for me, what I want from a popper is something that throws a bunch of water, makes a lot of noise, and doesn't move much. I find that when you pop it, if the lure stays within a foot or so from where you popped it, you get more hits. I think the fish just feel a little more aggressive, a little less intimidated if that lure is holding still. So the bulk in the back is to keep that body nice and high. That keeps that head down in the water so the surface of the water hits it somewhere in the middle. And this little turn down on the tail will give it a little more drive downwards as it's pushing water. I want it to pop and stop, but I'm adding one more element. I'm adding a knocker chamber, a hollow chamber with a nice big steel ball in it. This way, when the lure face hits the water, it stops the lure. This ball slams into this end of the hollow tube and makes a nice crack sound. So when you jerk the lure, the ball should hit the back, make a nice snappy sound, and when the lure stops, it should hit the front. So there should be a snap snap kind of sound coming from the lure. We'll have our tie-on eye just above the center line, a belly eye in the typical location about 2/3 of the way towards the head, and a tail hook eye that's turned down to help with stability. And we will do a little bit of carving just to give the face a little bit of a stylized look. I'm going to try to put on as big an eye as I can fit on the head, and I'm going to give it a paint job for saltwater on this one. I think this size of lure is perfect for both inshore saltwater and just about any freshwater fishing too. Now, making poppers with rattles in it is nothing new. I've made quite a few, and in fact, I kind of pride myself on how loud I can make these things rattle. But I think every popper I've made with a rattle in it, I've made on the lathe. This one, we're going to carve by hand and use a slightly different method of embedding this rattle chamber in it and getting that hollow face nicely rounded. So if you're new to the channel, my name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer and lure maker, and an avid fisherman. And I make these videos to share some of the tips and tricks that I've come up with and to add a little bit of physics and engineering to the art of lure making. So we'll be using this piece of cedar as our wood stock. It's 7/8 of an inch wide and about 1.25 inches deep. And I've gone ahead and drawn the concept shape right onto some blue tape so I can follow it to cut it. I've also done the top contour as well. So that means we're ready to pull the bandsaw in here and start cutting. While the lure is still attached to the stock wood, I'm going to work on a few details. I outlined the shape of the hollow face, and before we can move on, I want to cut the tail off this piece of wood. With that cut off, I can fit it in my drill press and drill out the hole where I'm going to put that rattle chamber. I've got to go pretty deep because it's going to be embedded deep almost to the back of the lure. With that done, I can take it back to the saw and finish cutting it out of the wood. I make my rattles from a drinking straw, and it's got to be big enough on the inside to handle this 1/4 inch steel ball, And it doesn't just fit, it actually has plenty of room to move freely. Here's a little rattle chamber I've already made. And I made a full video on making these and putting them in your lures, and I'll go ahead and link that above me. Now this one I want to make just a little bit longer because I want that big inertial pop when it hits the end of the tube. And to really get a really sharp sound, I like to seal it not with epoxy like I did with this one, but with a nail head. And what I do is I grind down that nail head so it fits in there perfectly so I can glue it in and it won't budge. And I'm just going to mark where I want to cut this off, since I want to leave about 3/8 of an inch to 1/2 an inch at the very top to seal it with some resin. So that's my cut mark. And I'm just going to cut it with scissors. And I'll cut the head off this nail just with brute force. Try not to lose the head. Alright, we've got both heads. Now I'll just sink the head down just enough so I have room for a little bit of glue, and I'll use a little bit of UV resin to glue the end in. Now I can drop the ball in, put the other nail head on, and glue that one on. And there's a dozen ways to do this. I'm sure a lot of you guys have come up with your own techniques. This really works well for me. Gives me just the sharpest sound that I can get out of these, and allows me to make them well ahead of time and store them till I'm ready to use them. And that does it. Now before I put it in there, I'm going to pour a little bit of casting resin, drop it in, and then fill it with casting resin. That way our rattle will be sealed in there and we can go on to carving our lure. And I'm just going to be using the aluminite casting resin. I'm going to mix 2 grams of A and 2 grams of B, no additional sort of admixture at all. Give it a quick stirring. There's not much in there, so it shouldn't take very long, but this stuff sets up very, very fast. I'm going to pour a little bit down in the bottom, drop this guy in there, and I'll top it off as it kind of dribbles down in there. And when it expands, for sure it'll fill in all the gaps. Then we'll have our hands full getting this thing shaped, hollowed out, and looking like a lure. Okay, I promised you some dimensions, and here are all the relevant dimensions. This little ellipse is actually looking into the lure, so you can see the size of that ellipse. But there's a key piece of information here for putting this thing together, and that's how we're going to get our screw-in eyes actually embedded, since the rattle's in the way. So on the tie-on eye, we'll be able to go above our rattle and on a pretty steep angle and still be able to get a nice embedment and get that glued in. But on these two, what I plan to do is cut a slot and just have these connected together and have a tail going out just for further embedment, so it's anchored in there, and all this below it will be filled with resin in the slot, so we can be sure that these hook eyes won't come out. Alright, well this thing is almost set. It's still a little too soft to sand or even cut, so we'll have to give it another 10 or 15 minutes. So in the meantime, I think it's a perfect time for the question of the week. So I'm getting a lot of questions about the mid coat I use between the paint that I put on my lures and the clear coat at the end. And what I use is this Minwax polycrylic. Here in the US it runs around $11 or $12 for this quart, but it lasts for ages. I've had this probably 3 years. This one is gloss, and I bought it just to experiment with it, and it works fine, so I just kept using it. It adheres perfectly to the paint on the lure, and the clear coat adheres perfectly to it. I never ever have had anything sort of peel up or flake off or anything. Now the other question is, why do I use it? Well, it really is just to seal the paint and to prep that surface for the clear coat. Clear coats can be a little bit temperamental. Sometimes they go on smooth, spread smoothly, and finish flawlessly, but oftentimes they'll finish with fish eyes or areas where it just pulls away from the surface. And sometimes it doesn't like the paint you're using at all. And I have yet to find a paint that this stuff doesn't go on and seal just fine. Now, I don't make any money on this stuff. I spend money on this stuff. Minwax does not sponsor me or give me anything free. It's just something that I found that really has solved all my problems with crappy finishes. I was always really stressed out anytime I was clear coating a lure, because it was the moment of truth. It was either going to turn into a gem or a piece of junk. The other question I get is, how do I use it? Is it better to brush it on, spray it on, or dip it? And honestly, it's up to you. It works the same either way. If I'm using it to seal wood, I'll dip the wood in it. But if I'm using just to seal the paint, I usually just spray it on. I never brush it on. It just seems slow and inefficient. The other question is cleanup. It is water-based. It will clean up with water pretty easily as long as it hasn't started to set. But after you've rinsed it out of your airbrush, go ahead and squirt some alcohol in there and finish off that squirting, because it will leave a little residue that'll make it a little sticky. Now, last thing that people ask is, how do I cut it to use it? And no matter if I'm going to use it to dip it or to spray it, I cut it 15% by volume with distilled water. Don't use purified water. I don't recommend it. The distilling process takes out all the minerals, and the minerals could be a problem with paint. So I'll usually mix it in small batches. This is a 100 ml little measuring cup. Then that black line right there is 85 milliliters. So I'll open the can and make sure it's mixed up good. I transferred it to this just to make it easy pouring. And then I'll just fill it to that black line. And then I'll take my distilled water and I put a little bit in a small cup just to make it easy on myself. And right here we have our 100 millimeter line, and I'll just fill it with water to that line. Then it's just a matter of stirring it up, or you can just pour the whole thing, trying not to spill, into your final container and just shake it up in there. And that's it. It's ready to spray right out of this bottle. And this 200 milliliters will last me probably 6 months, probably more. All right, I hope that helped. Let's get back to the build. And we're ready to go ahead and start shaping this little block of wood here. And that sound is just perfect. And I'm gonna go ahead and get the rough shape with the belt sander. So what I'll do is just get all these corners cut back so I can start to form a round body, and I'll get back to you when I'm closer to just doing some final hand sanding. All right, I've got it pretty close. I'm kind of chasing the symmetry a little bit because I kind of flattened out one side a little more than I needed to. But I think it's looking pretty nice. It actually has a little more of a sculpted look than the original drawing. Kind of has the back end of a wasp or something. But now I need to go ahead and start grinding away at the hollow spot on the front. And I'm going to use my die grinder. It's loud and it's obnoxious, but it does quick work. And I've got a round rasp bit, and it takes a lot of material off. These are very rough surface. So I'll start with this, and then we'll move to a smoother stone, maybe with the Dremel. All right, that's pretty deep. I'll go to a smoother stone now, finish it off, and take some of these marks off. I'm also gonna kind of undercut it a little bit, so there's a little more material forward at the top than there is at the bottom. All right, so while my second coat of this fairing stuff dries, I went ahead and drew in the carving details. I just free-handed it, but I think it came out pretty symmetric. And we can just get started on the rough carving while this stuff sets. Not a big fan of carving with cedar. It prefers to chip than to be cut. That means you just got to go slower and do a lot more sanding later. Whenever I get to about this point in my carving, I'm always regretting that I decided to carve anything at all. It's such a tedious thing to do, and it really is purely aesthetic, doesn't do anything for the lure as far as function. It probably doesn't attract any more bites than just a plain lure. So I've also gone ahead and drawn a line where I'm going to cut the slot for those hook eyes. First I'll drill a little guide hole. And we'll take a disc and go ahead and cut the slot. Alright, that should do it. Now it's just a matter of forming those wires.
Using some stainless steel leader wire, I formed this turned under eye, and that'll fit right in the tail section. That little tag is going to form the next eye, and I'll bend it using these little mini wire forming pliers. And there you go. Now I'm going to use a piece of the same wire as a drill bit, and I'm going to drill a tiny little hole forward so I can slide the tag end at the front of the little wire harness right in there. That'll hold it in place while I fill the slot with some UV resin. And I'll set it real quick with the UV light. But in the end, I like to let it sit on the bigger light for at least 5 or 10 minutes to get it really cured.
Okay, for the foil, I went ahead and traced the whole body, but really I'm only going to use this top section here because this thing has such quick changes in radiuses so close together that if I tried to do the whole body, I'd get a bunch of wrinkles up here and down here, and probably it would rip down here where it would have to stretch. So it's going to look something like that. That should look pretty good.
Time to make the twisted eye that we'll use for the tie-on eye in the front of the lure. I'll cut it to size, and then I'll dry fit it, make sure it works before I glue it in. At this point I want to put an initial clear coat on it. First, I'll wipe it down with some alcohol. But this coat is really just to seal the wood and to hide those little seam lines from the foil. It just makes it so that the paint goes on a little bit smoother. And I'll put it to turn in the UV chamber for 20 to 30 minutes until it's good and set.
Alright, I'm going to go ahead and start off this kind of the way I start off most of these paint jobs. And I want to go ahead and put a white base coat on it. Now I don't want to obscure the shine of this foil, so whatever overspray gets on the foil, I'll wipe it off with some alcohol. Hopefully that'll look okay. I'm a little disappointed with the foil not really contouring to the carving very well. It looks a little messier than really it should, but that's alright. And I'm going to use Tester's Aztec paints. This is the opaque white. And a little bit of alcohol will get the shine back on this foil. Alright, that's what I call saltwater colors. And a lot of folks ask me, you put foil on it and then you paint all over it. And for me, the foil really is so that I have something reflective behind the transparent paints. I just think it gives the paint job a kind of depth that you really don't get with opaque paints. So we got the eyes on there. Got a nice rattle going. You guys know the drill. I'm going to go ahead and let this dry for a few hours. Hit it with our Minwax polyacrylic for the mid coat. And then we'll put a clear coat on it. And then tomorrow, because it's already dark, we'll take it to the water and see what it looks like in the sunshine and in the water. Alright, it's been long enough. Let's see what it looks like. And if you've enjoyed the video up to now, do me a solid, give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe and share this stuff with your friends. I really want to keep building this channel. I really like it. I like the color shift. It never really comes out on the camera, but it really has a cool color shift. I'm gonna put a couple hooks on it. We'll get down there, and as always, at the end of the video, I'll have a nice slideshow so you can get a better look at the paint job. Let's get down there. All right, there it is. Let's go ahead and put it in order and see what it looks like. All right, let's give it a little cast. And I put it right next to that lily pad just to see how little it moves when we pop it. It barely moves, maybe a couple inches. Oh, I love that deep pop. All right guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget about the slideshow. And I'm gonna take this thing fishing and videotape it. If I catch anything, that footage will be right after the slideshow. I'll see you guys next Friday. Oh. Oh, yeah. Oh, come on. Tell me you're not off. Oh, he got off. I was surprised he was on at all. Actually, I barely felt him on the line. Oh, whatever it is, it's got a good size to it. Stay down, baby. Don't rock it off. Oh. Pickerel. Man, he really slammed it. These things are hard to hook. Oh. There he goes.